Inside of the concentration camps, there were many different members of staff and guards who made prisoners' lives a misery on a daily basis. Guards such as Irma Grazer and commandants such as Josef Kramer, the Beast of Belsen, became infamous for their barbaric treatment and murderous antics, where they would shoot prisoners without any moment's hesitation. They often killed for no reason, but many of these Nazi war criminals were executed after the war for their evil crimes. But there were many more who escaped the hangman's noose, and some even lived normal lives after the end of World War II. But there was one former concentration camp doctor who was a sadist and who was known for torturing and killing patients, who surprisingly and shockingly continued to practice medicine and treat patients even after he had spent some time in prison for being a convicted war criminal. Dr Hans Eisele opened up a medical practice and continued to work as a doctor following his release from prison. But what is the shocking story of this? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Hans Eisele came from a rather humble background, as his father was a church painter, but his family suffered economically due to inflation during the 1920s. Hans attended a grammar school in his hometown, and he then studied medicine in Freiburg in 1931. In 1933 he joined the Nazi Party after being attracted to Hitler's politics, and he believed that Hitler could save Germany from the turmoil it had been in. He joined the SS following this, and was a man who was married with 3 children. After being in the SS for a number of years, in January 1940, he was transferred to the Waffen-SS after the outbreak of the war, where he worked as a doctor treating soldiers for their wounds briefly. But then he would be transferred to Sachsenhausen concentration camp to work. Sachsenhausen was a camp where 200,000 prisoners would be held inside the barbed wire fences, and over 100,000 were killed there. It was a site fitted with a gas chamber and special medical experimentation area, and the inmates were treated terribly and were not fed sufficiently. Punishments at Sachsenhausen were brutal, and some became notorious, for example the Sachsenhausen salute, where a prisoner was forced to squat with their arms outstretched in front of them, and march like this for around 25 miles a day. Prisoners were also kept in isolation and on barely any food, and there were also public executions such as hangings that took place in front of other prisoners. There were large-scale executions at Sachsenhausen, including the executions of SOE agents and survivors of commando anti-shipping operations. Some of the most dissenting Germans against the Nazis were held there also, and further members of the resistance were executed. Prisoners were forced to work incredibly hard in the industrial sites at the camp, including the SS workshops for companies such as Heinkel, who manufactured aircraft and bomber aircraft. The work was very difficult, and often led to prisoners dying from horrific conditions and the amount they had to do. There was also a next shooting facility, where prisoners were taken into a small room with music playing, before they were told they'd have their height and weight measured in the form of a medical exam. When their height was measured, a sliding door behind the prisoner's neck would be opened, and a pistol would be aimed through, with an SS executioner shooting the inmate dead. Hans Eisele came to Sachsenhausen early on in January 1940, and he remained here for a while. His reputation here initially was a strange one, as he was referred to as the Angel, as he allegedly helped exhausted prisoners and inmates, and his treatment of inmates to begin with was positive and helpful. However, things then changed. He was transferred to Mauthausen concentration camp, and then following this went to work at Buchenwald from February to August 1941. Whilst here, his outlook and behaviour changed, and not for the better. Buchenwald was a place where 280,000 people were imprisoned within the camp, and around 56,000 officially were killed. The camp was known for being in particular very brutal, with illnesses and disease spreading heavily around there. Prisoners were also worked to death and exterminated through labour. Also there were executions, with prisoners being murdered by hanging or shooting. But whilst here, Eisele changed, and he became known as the Butcher. As a camp doctor, he murdered, it's believed, at least 200 Jews who were suffering from tuberculosis. He also was part of the barbaric experiments that took place there, and many of these were performed without painkillers or anaesthetics, when many of the patients died. He was also known for torturing and abusing patients at Buchenwald, but then he was transferred yet again to Natzweiler concentration camp. He continued to move around, was then part of an SS hospital in Prague in June 1943, he was then changed over to military duty with the SS on the Eastern Front. He continued to serve as an SS doctor treating the wounded, until he was sent to Dachau in the final months of the war, where he served under other notorious evil doctors, before he was arrested by the Americans in April 1945. Hans Eisele was brought to trial on the 13th of December 1945, and he stood alongside 39 other defendants in the Dachau main trials. Eisele was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, as it was proven that during his short time at Dachau he had been complicit and part of 3 executions, and that he had issued the death certificates afterwards. His crimes at other camps were largely ignored, but he was sentenced to death. But following a review, Eisele's death sentence was reduced to a prison term, and the reason for this was that the military could not find evidence of him directly mistreating prisoners, and it was strangely said that during his time at Dachau he had improved some medical care. But he, Eisele, was tried later again at the Buchenwald trials, and was found guilty and was yet again sentenced to death. But he managed to get away with it again, and he was sentenced to 10 years prison time. But during his time at Landsberg prison as a war criminal, he wrote a defence for himself, and claimed he was a Christian who had been a caring doctor. But there were many witnesses to his crimes, and many prisoners documented how evil he really was. He was released from prison on the 26th of February 1952, but disgustingly he then opened up a doctor and medical practice in Munich following his release, with the murderous Nazi doctor treating patients yet again. In 1958 further accusations were made against Hans Eisele, including that he had murdered at least 200 Jews and had performed horrific medical experiments. Because of this, Eisele fled Germany to go to Egypt, as an underground SS rat line helped him flee, and he then lived under a secret name. He was part of a number of other former SS members who worked together to remain undetected. But Mossad, the Israeli Special Forces, knew where he was, and they tried to assassinate him using a letter bomb in 1963, but this detonated early and killed a postal worker. But Hans Eisele would die on the 3rd of May 1967 at the age of 54. Dr Hans Eisele was a man who managed to escape 2 death sentences and executions, but ultimately he was an evil SS doctor whose work resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people. He was a man who seemingly could switch between the evil and caring bedside manner he had, but shockingly he opened up a new practice in Munich, in the heart of the former Nazi Party's stranglehold after the war. It's interesting to consider whether his patients had any knowledge of his background, or what he'd done inside the concentration camps. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.